Hello world. Saturday the 23rd of January. Time for our talk again. We're looking at a weather forecast for Worcester for Soaring tomorrow the 24th of January. Just before I start, a quick comment on today's flying and the forecast. The T5 gram for 11 o'clock this morning showed winds of 10 to 15 knots, and on the airfield we had closer to 25 to 30 knots. So obviously there is a difference between the real weather and the model, and that implies the rest of the day will be different as well. Fortunately today it implied that the weather was actually quite a lot stronger than the forecast, except the guys who went out east would have had an interesting ride, a bit rough. Getting on to tomorrow, the weather's cooled down quite a bit. It's below about 23 degrees on the ground. We have convection up to about 5,500 feet, and then 6,000 feet we have an inversion, and you can see it's a very strong inversion. The wind has swung around. We've got a southeast wind, and it's blowing once again at about 20 knots. Looking at that wind, we can see it coming up the Breda River Valley. There's an onshore component onto the Langeberg. As we get round the corner, it spurts into the Tilbach Valley. There's still some windward component on the Witzenberg Mountains and some at the end of the Witzenberg, but the front ridge, all of this, and the Porterville Ridge is basically in the lee of this wind. There's some other options. The Slanghoek Mountains have got some windward slopes from Vic Peak down towards Villiersdorp, and past Villiersdorp onto the Hottentots Hollands Mountains west of Teerwaterskloof. There's also some windward slopes here. That's all looking quite interesting. Just zooming out a bit so that we can see Swellendam, and out to the east also windward slopes at 2 o'clock. Just interesting, between Swellendam and Ashton, the wind gets quite parallel to the ridge. At 5 o'clock, we see this wind is the same, but the spurting has increased. The Tilbach Valley is now looking 25-26 knots of wind, and you can see the strong off leeward flow on the front ridge. Let's zoom out a bit. We can see at Swellendam still windward, perhaps not that strong, but still a decent flow. This section, which is a bit parallel to the ridge. Looking at cloud, we have some cloud coming in from the southeast. It's reached Robertson by 2 o'clock, but let's zoom out a bit. We can see at Swellendam, cloud base here is about 4,000 feet, maybe 3.5, and it still holds between 3.5 and 4 quite far east until we start getting into lower cloud. That's getting on towards George. As we move out to 5 o'clock, Worcester area is still clear, some high cloud over here, but at Swellendam we can see it's now dropped to at 3,500 feet. Because it's big blue areas, I have a look at the height of the critical updraft strength, basically the top of the thermic layer. You can see there's quite a lot of useful flying around the Breda River Valley. This is 5,000 feet odd. There's some dead patches in the valley itself. The mountains are all working between 4,500 5,000 feet, not all that high. A little bit lower as we get towards the Hottentot Hollands. Zooming out a bit, you can see that the front ridge, Porterville, have got some big holes. By 5 o'clock, we can see this easterly wind has killed off the whole of the Tulbach Valley, the whole of the front ridge. And if we zoom out, a big chunk of sky to the south of Swellendam. This is coastal air that comes in, and I think there's some more coming in from this side. Okay, let's move on to some forecast, some task options. Next slide. It's gone that way. We'll start with some soundings. That's Robertson at 2 o'clock, looking good. At 5 o'clock, reasonable, but it's dropped below 4,000 feet already. A bit of dead air just below that inversion. It's just cooled off. Swellendam, 2 o'clock, cloud base just below 4,000 feet. And at 5 o'clock, it's cooled off to about 3,500 feet. This is the Doorns. We don't normally go up the Hex River Valley, but you can see it would be good, but there's just nowhere to land out, so it's not a good place to set a task. Series, another option. This is a map of the maximum up and down draft motion. Up and down draft, it's basically convection, convergence, showing the ridges, and gives us a good idea of our options. From Worcester, we can see we can go out to the east. There's a bit of a zone just in the lee of Robertson Spur, and often there's some strong turbulence and sink over here. Across Robinson, it's looking good again. Vleersdorp Ridge looks alright, and across maybe Slanghoek also looks alright. If we zoom out, we lose a lot of the detail, but we can see that Swellendam eastwards is working, and this section between Swellendam and Ashton is not so strong. Also between Robertson and Kieronberg, not all that exciting. At 5 o'clock, we can see most of these ridges are still working, which is good. And if I zoom out, much the same, just a few dead patches that we pointed out before. Just one comment on this sounding. This is Robertson, but when we get this very strong inversion, if it happens to be at the top of the ridge height or a little bit below the ridge height, that can cause quite strong turbulence, because the air is rushing up the side of the ridge and hits the inversion before it can escape over the top of the ridge, and then it starts coming down and going sideways and all over the place. So be a little bit careful. I think tomorrow it's at this stage above the ridge, but there may be portions of the ridge that get quite turbulent. Enjoy your flying tomorrow. Fly safely and have fun.